advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness, starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery, and we have managed more than $1 billion in recovery. We've also assisted thousands of community associations in the placement of insurance and making sure that they have what they need in the event that something were to occur. Now, we have a great show which is all about that, making sure that you have all the information you need as we head into this legislation session and as things are moving around. We want to make sure that you have all the relevant information as a community association board member or property manager. It's a ever-changing landscape. There's so many things that happen. There's many laws and bills that have passed over the last few years. And as I've gone out to the community and talked to, whether it was president of management companies or on-site managers, I've realized that not everyone is really aware of the laws that have been passed, as well as those that are being proposed. And certainly with the whole, obviously the tragedy of the Champaign South Tower and all the things that have come out of it, it's really important that you do have your finger on the pulse and you know what's going on. So my next guests know all about that. Why? Because they are actively, again, lobbying on behalf of community associations and making sure that they have what they need and make sure that all the information is being disseminated to all of you, whether you're a property manager or a board member. And I want to bring our next guests on and introduce them. And with us today, we have Mark and Josh. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dan.
So Mark Anderson and Josh Burkett. So guys, introduce a little bit about your firm, introduce what you guys are seeing right now and what in some of your experiences and how this year there may be a little bit of a different feeling to it.
Well, Dan, thank you. I'm a lobbyist by trade, own and operate my own lobby firm here in Tallahassee, but I'm also the executive director of a professional trade group called Chief Executive Officers of Management Companies. And that is a group of managers who represent the community association management industry in Florida. To give you some sense of the scale of who we are, in Florida, there's roughly 22 million people who live in a community association. 12 million of those are living in a managed community, and 6 million of those are living in communities that are managed by companies who belong to CEOMC. So to give you some sense of the scale, we're roughly 26 to 27% of our state's population who live in communities managed by the folks we're here today representing. So we've got a good feel of what's going on out there in the communities that are being managed. We also are very well aware of what's going on in many of the self-managed communities as well. And so we're here today to try to give some context to what's going on here in Tallahassee. And there's a great deal going on, as you can imagine, relating to Surfside, which is really kind of the overarching theme of everything that's going on here in Tallahassee.
Yeah, no, there's just a lot of chatter about it and a lot of things going on and just a lot of information in general. I mean, you have different trade, special interest groups and everything else talking about their piece and everything else. And how it all trickles down into the actual bills, and then the bills get tag-alongs, and there's a lot of things that change as these things move their way through the legislative house. And having seen it firsthand and been in and out of the legislators' offices and lobbying for consumer rights and protections over the years, I know how complicated it could be, and what goes in isn't always what comes out. So I applaud all of your efforts, and thank you guys so much for coming here and to spend a few minutes with us and to talk about it, because this information needs to get out there. And I honestly, as I mentioned to you guys before we came onto the broadcast, I've been talking to folks out there about the bills, and I think there's maybe it's information overload, and they just don't know what information is really pertinent to them in their situation. And I'm glad you mentioned like self-managed buildings and things like that, because I think sometimes these management companies do a great job of disseminating the information to their managers, but as a self-managed property, sometimes you don't feel as if you have access to information. And I really think that's a great thing that CEOMC is doing about getting that information out there. And this just in general, this is about property management, this is about community associations and operating and moving forward. So what are some of the most impactful bills that your team are dealing with right now that you're advocating for and against? Because I imagine there are some bills that you're not so happy with, and there are some bills that you're fully supportive of.
There's a lot going on here, and there's probably some 36 bills that have been filed in the House and Senate that relate to community association living in some way. Most of them come to Tallahassee through a legislator who probably more often than not, Dan, has had not the greatest experience with their community association, unfortunately. So a lot of these bills we see coming through the process here are intended to address some problem that they've dealt with as a legislator, as a homeowner before becoming a legislator, in fact. So we're dealing with a lot of, keeping, first doing no harm to the way in which community associations operate, which is to really, and our primary role as an industry is to protect the quality of life and the cost of living for the 6 million people we interact with every day. So every one of those bills has a cost effect to it. It has a qualitative impact as well on people's standard of living, on their cost of living. We obviously see a lot going on with respect to Surfside. There's always that tendency to kind of overshoot or overcorrect. And rightly so. Quite honestly, I mean, the buildings are not supposed to collapse. So how do we fix that? And the legislature's really been tasked with receiving a lot of input and coming up with a bill that will address both the structural problems that led to the bill falling, and also some of the more proactive measures that can be taken to ensure that community associations are doing something responsible. For instance, planning for reserves. We see, for example, legislation was just introduced that was published on Friday. So your show here is very timely today. It was just published on Friday. It was given a bill number that will do a number of things relative to community associations, like making it more difficult to waive reserves. We saw with Surfside, for example, they waived reserves year in and year out, and so we saw the cost of that deferred maintenance catch up significantly to a point where they just couldn't catch up with it. And so the bill that's just come out that we're looking at, in fact, we're analyzing just as recently as a few minutes ago, is intended to make it more difficult to waive reserves and encourage associations to do the more responsible thing, which is to ensure that we maintain those buildings. It defines how often these reserve studies ought to be done, what goes into the reserve study, for example, and there's a lot of things that go into that I think will make intended to make our associations work better. Dan, more people live in community associations in Florida than any other state in the country. To give you some sense of how important Florida is, we're a bellwether. How Florida does right now will determine how other states will do the very same thing. So we got to get it right. And obviously, we've got great buildings in Florida. Fortunately, in our experience, none of them are on the verge of collapse, which is a great thing. But we want to continue to ensure that we're doing the right thing. And reserves is a big part of what I think this legislature is looking to address.
Yeah, so there's a couple bill numbers. We have 1702, we have Senate Bill 736, House Bill 583. There's and we're going to make sure that all of that information specifically relates to the bills, and we'll make sure that we get that new bill number that you just mentioned. We'll make sure that's in the description, available there, so that the viewers can actually click on it, find out information about it. Because sometimes I find the Senate's website a little bit difficult to navigate for a lay person like myself. But that's why we in this in this industry rely on people like you that are out there advocating and looking out for the best interests of those that are either servicing the community associations, as we do for thousands of community associations, but also for those that are trying to manage them and live in them and dealing with the situations, this untenable situation. But this isn't the only time that Florida has found itself as kind of like the barometer for what change is needed, right? You have the Florida Building Code, which became adopted and turned into the National Building Code. I kind of feel like this is some semblance here where they're going to roll out some national programs based on whatever comes out of the other side of this. You guys definitely have a daunting task to get through all this, because just from the time that we first spoke about doing this to the time that we are now doing the broadcast, there's been more bills introduced, as you just mentioned. So at the end of, I'm sure at the time this airs and people see it and view it, there'll probably even be more after that. But let's get into a few of these bills, getting a little bit of the detail on it. So we have Senate Bill 1702, we have Senate Bill 736, and House Bill 583. Which of these are you supporting, advocating for, or against? Or is there anything in detail that you can provide us that is good or bad or the ugly that might be able to help our audience in just at least planning or some sort of expectation? Are they going to pass, or do you not think it's going to pass? Is there any sort of semblance of an idea of where these things are headed?
I think that something is going to pass. There's no question that in the wake of Surfside, there's just definitely something the legislature has to do to appear responsive to what happened there. And there were statutes, quite honestly, that could be updated to improve the way that the Champlain Towers at Surfside could have operated. For example, our statutes allow for the waiving of reserve requirements. They're looking to tighten that up. House Bill or Senate Bill 7042, I believe, is the bill number that just came out. That is the broad kind of Surfside legislation that addresses a number of things I've just described. These bills you just laid out, 736, House Bill 583, they're really all tied together. Part of it addresses the more structural concerns that led to some of that we don't have a direct relationship to. And the other part of that is the bill that just came out, 7042, that relates to the operations of associations that I think our community associations are going to care and are going to have a lot more of an impact on how they operate. In terms of what they can and what they cannot do, the things they're going to have to be mindful of, how many inspections are going to have to be done, and how frequently are they going to be done? Do we take into account those buildings that are within a certain distance from the coastline where you have saltwater intrusion and saltwater erosion much more accelerated for those buildings than those that are more interior to the state? That bill on 1702, I think, addresses some of that. As well. So all of these bills are tied together, and I believe there will be something, at least there will be something that passes, both in terms of the operational side of community associations and the structural safety part of how they're built, which is, of course, not something we're involved with. We're not inspectors as managers, we're not builders, we're not engineers, but there is legislation that you've just described, as well as the construction defect claim legislation that is moving through that is addressing some of those issues as well.
No, when we talk reserves, we're always talking money, right? So, and I think over the years, as we've seen more investor-owned community associations where it's really these, you have these individuals buying these properties based on a spreadsheet, right? Is it going to make me money? Can I bring my money into the United States, buy a piece of property for various different reasons? Now we have this, this incredible population of people living full time down here, right? Because of the migration due to the pandemic and conditions. So, I mean, the timing of some of this stuff almost seems good because I think you have more people living in the buildings year round than, let's say, in prior years. So, I think there's a lot of change, a lot of good change, and I think a lot of more interested people that are here locally rather than at a distance, who might not be so interested in the financial health or the condition of the property more so than just, is it making them money? So I think those things are changing too. And, for all those of us who own single family homes, I mean, I'm constantly reserving in my own way to make repairs on my own property. It's remarkable to me when I sit in these board meetings and they are not reserving and they're waiving these things. And it's like, whoa, man, if I had stucco falling off my home, I would probably immediately fix it, right? I'm not going to just ignore those things. But for some of these buildings, they have ignored it for decade after decade, and I'm talking decade. You got some of these properties and you're just like, wow, that's been there for like 30, 40 years easily. It's been there for so long that the original board members that were there that owned originally will tell you that, they can't remember a time when it wasn't there. And then you just kind of scratch your head as to like, who are you blaming right now? And why are you so frustrated? I know you bought the unit on a fixed income, but you are part of the problem, which is leading to an issue where now the structural integrity of these buildings are just not really being protected, and it's it could hurt people, as we've obviously unfortunately saw witness to. So I think a lot, and then obviously being insurance coverage experts here at GlobalPro, right? We think a lot about the insurance, right? How does this going to impact insurance? What are the major changes that we're going to see there? How do you see, and I believe there's a bill, House Bill 503, that's out there. How do you see the impacts of on insurance and the rising costs of it? Certainly, I've already seen insurance companies take a position regarding the renewal process and wanting this 40-year inspection reports and everything else, and actually non-renewing policies. How do you see these things playing out, and where do you see this bill landing?
Dan, how much time do we have?
I warned you guys at the beginning. I want to get into the weeds on some of this stuff, but 20, 30-minute broadcast. But, high level here. Where do you, I mean, or give us some details and we'll come back. It's okay. So,
boy, insurance is a mess in Florida right now, and it's been made even more exacerbated by the tragedy at Surfside. There is a lot going on with insurance. I think overall, and I'll let Josh touch on some of this because I know he's been involved in some of the weeds on it. But I think overall, the legislature is going to look at taking really just balancing the obligation to do what's right and not waiving reserves and keeping those buildings maintained. And obviously that'll help insurance from a bigger picture perspective. But how do we ensure, and how does the legislature ensure that we don't increase people's cost of living dramatically? Because for a lot of these communities, they haven't had reserves, or they've decided to waive it, and they've done okay. How do we ensure that they aren't priced out of their building by not allowing them to do something that the Florida law has allowed them to do for a long time? So I think that's really the challenge of the bigger picture of what we're going to be seeing through this legislation. As it relates to insurance, I might want to, if Josh, you want to touch on that for a quick second? It's a messy, Dan. There's
it always is.
As you can only imagine, there's only about 1,000 lobbyists employed in the insurance industry on a good day, I'm sure. But anyway, it's a big piece of what we're talking about, and it's inextricably tied to a lot of what we're talking about as well with respect to Surfside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dan, thank you so much for having me. My name's Josh Burkett, and I also work with Mark on the lobbying team for CEOMC. And, as you brought up, and as it relates to insurance and tying into what you mentioned with construction defect bills as well, what the Florida legislature is looking at with these bills, as Mark said, is inextricably all tied together. So you have insurance carriers in Florida who cover condominiums, and our admitted carriers are leaving this state in droves due to increased litigation against them, for one reason or the next. And so the legislature is looking at, well, how can we get more competition in the marketplace? And so a lot of these insurance bills, their goal and aim is to get more competition in the marketplace, but they also have to balance out the fact of some consumer protections for insurance companies that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing and paying out their policies. And this ties into, you mentioned Senate Bill 736 on construction defects. The goal of what they're looking at there is when it comes to like single family homes, mainly in like HOAs, and these developers are seeing sometimes attorneys come in and they find some stucco issues, as you mentioned, and they file a claim not only for that one single family home, but every single home in the community. And so the developers and the Florida Justice Association are trying to have a conversation about, well, how do we curb frivolous lawsuits, also while again advocating for consumer protection. So you mentioned Senate Bill 736. That bill kind of focuses on doing two things relating to construction defect. One, they're going to take the statute of repose for latent defects down from 10 years to 4 years. And there's been some amendments to have some sliding scale to where condos will be 10, townhomes will be 7, single family homes will be 5. And then the main thing too is redoing how 558 claims happen in Florida. The whole purpose of 558 was to avoid litigation. Yeah. But what we're seeing is we're not avoiding any litigation whatsoever. And to that point, there's a House companion bill on construction defect where they don't touch the statute of repose at all. What they do is they just strike 558 from statute, because their argument is if 558 isn't working, why are we going to argue about how to fix it? Let's just repeal it. So it's kind of two lines of thought right now. The House bill looks nothing like the Senate bill. From a community association standpoint on construction defect, 558, no 558, our big thing is this statute of repose. We need to make sure that these community associations, especially when it comes to latent defects, can be made whole. Think about it just from a practical standpoint. A lot of times turnover doesn't happen until after 4 years. So the developer has control of the community. They turn over in 6 years. The statute of repose for latent defects is already passed. And in year 8, we see an issue come out with, stucco on stick or something like that. And there's no remedy for those homeowners, So that's something too that we're trying to balance. And with the insurance bills that you mentioned, I mean, their goal again is to curb litigation, but some of the remedies that they've come up with is like a sliding scale for roof replacement, to where, after 10 years, you can't even get full replacement costs.
Yep.
So in a condo association, how are we supposed to budget for that? Tying all the way back in to reserves and this overall Surfside bill, which is 7042, as Mark mentioned. I mean, putting a budget together for some of these communities that have 105 buildings under a master association, and basically after 10 years, the insurance company doesn't have to provide full replacement coverage, and it's some like sliding scale. So it really just confuses everything, and that's part of the balancing act that we try to do up here in Tallahassee. You mentioned Senate Bill 1702 relating to mandatory building inspections. They've taken that bill and actually rolled it into that new Senate Bill 7042 that's been filed. The goal of that is to have all of these associations get these inspections. And we think that's a great idea, but the practicality of it, the timelines to get the inspections done, are they long enough for associations? What's the new cost? These
who's
are
paying for it?
Corporations.
Yeah.
And so you can mandate all the stuff you want, but at the end of the day, if the associations can't afford it, well, then what are we going to do with that? So, everything is inexplicably linked to one another here. And, we of everything that we're seeing, there's going to be this response to Surfside and dealing with reserves and inspections and disclosures. And, you asked the question, what are we supporting? I mean, the overarching idea of what they're trying to do is a good idea. But as we all know, the devil's in the details, right? If they set something up that can't be done by associations, well, then nothing really got done.
No, I mean, you mentioned so many things that we can unpack right there, and it was a great amount of detail. I mean, that's what this is about. I'm so grateful to have you guys on to talk about these things, because, I mean, we just see a lot of, particularly on the construction defect side of stuff. I was literally today in a room full of insurance brokers that primarily sell insurance to developers, OSIP, PIP, wrap policies. And I showed them the 558 statute. There was 6 of them around the table. None of them had actually ever read it. So here you have a room full of brokers that sell construction policies to developer builders that are going to go through the turnover process and deal with the cottage industry of 558 litigation, right? And I read to them, and it's basically a culmination of like 7 or 8 sentences, and 3 of them specifically said, including the very first one and the very last one, that the entire intent of the statute is to avoid the cost of litigation. And it's like, it's remarkable how much litigation it creates because how really unclear the law currently is, and the obligations of the association in order to prove their claim, and then the directions that the community association are given by council with regard to getting these engineering reports and the way in which they're published to the. I mean, it's not published as, hey, let's have a meeting and let's resolve this. No, it's, hey, here's a report and you have 30 days and we're suing you. And they already have this lawsuit drafted. No one's coming to the table to resolve these things. And unfortunately, I think it honestly has led to a fattening of the pockets of a lot of lawyers. And a lot of associations end up with very little. And we actually rolled out an entire program around this where we realize that if insurance is there, and more often today than ever before, coming to the table sooner rather than later to defend and pay these claims when you have construction-related issues, then why aren't you first adjusting the claim and presenting those things just like you would do on any sort of liability or third-party claim, and allowing this process, right, to go through where you're dealing with it? And we have literally represented many associations before they actually ultimately hired an attorney. And when they hired the attorney, it's on 3 or 4 smaller issues. It's not a 10, 20, $50 million giant lawsuit that gets resolved for $1 million. No, we already collected a couple $1 million for them. They already started making repairs. And now they're really only litigating over an issue of, did the reserves get properly funded? Is there correct, there's some of the issues that are not insurance related, right? Things that really need to probably be litigated, or at least the threat of litigation to get them into some sort of mediation to get it resolved. But there is another way of doing these things, and I definitely think there is alternatives to it. And I think that's what you're talking about here, is that how do you, how do you work through this? I mean, at our last broadcast, I talked about there's a report out from 2021 which talks about 68% of policyholders that have had claims are unsatisfied with the claim payments. And then you have the insurance lobbyists going into legislation and saying, oh, the rates are going up because of all the lawsuits. They're all a bunch of frivolous lawsuits. Well, but if you poll the policyholder, 68% by Valued Penguin, it's a report that we recently published, say that they're unsatisfied with the claim settlement. So is it frivolous lawsuits, or are you just not servicing your policyholder anymore? You're selling a product that's just not paying anything. And I think that there's just a tough coordination between the reality of being on site dealing with some of these issues, the desires of some of the professionals that are around it that are making money on doing these things, and then the association themselves, who it's a nonprofit. They're not doing this. These board members aren't getting paid. I know that's also part of the discussion. Some of them want to get compensated for it. It's a tough job. It's unless you have someone that's on site full time, retired, or just very wealthy, that's just doing this stuff all day long, which may not be the best situation either. You're really not going to get someone that's observant enough or cared enough to make sure that these are all taken care of. And like I and all of GlobalPro certainly supports reform. We would never want to see something with that happen in Surfside ever again. We've dealt with dozens of collapsed claims where buildings have fallen down in part or completely. None such as tragic as Surfside, for sure. In fact, I can't think of one where we actually had any sort of injury or death. So if that's the case, where we have handled dozens of these claims for collapses and buildings falling down in part or full, and I've never seen a death or anyone get hurt in it, I mean, again, it's such a tragedy. Something needs to be done. Reform is necessary. I applaud all of your efforts, guys. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Josh. Thank you to CEOMC. If you don't know about the organization, go and check it out. Mark, can you give us some of the information, I guess the website, or some of the information about some of the upcoming events that you guys have going on? If you're a property manager or a board member, you definitely want to attend these things. You definitely want to check out the website, learn about this organization, and all the great things. GlobalPro has made a huge effort to partner with you guys. So, Mark, what's coming up? How can our audience find out more about CEOMC?
Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure to be with you today. And if you want to know everything about who we are, go to our website, CEOMCFL, as in Florida.com. That's CEOMCFL.com. And all the information about the events we do every year are listed there, past and present. We also are looking forward to our partnership with you at GlobalPro and the things that we'll be doing together with you. We're excited about that. Understand our fishing tournament is coming up as well, coming up later in the spring. So take a look at our website. We have a number of great things that people can participate in, particularly if you're in that community association space. That can you'll find we'll find a place for you if you're interested. But it's really been a pleasure to be with you, Dan.
All right, no, awesome. Thank you, Mark. Again, thank you, Josh. It's been a great broadcast. Learned a lot of information. I mean, we're going to make sure that your website, CEOMCFL.com, as well as all the information regarding any of the bills that we talked about today, is in the description, is available so that you guys can click on it, find out more information. As more information becomes known, we're obviously going to continue publishing it, and I know CEOMC is going to be doing just the same. It's such an important legislative session. I would argue maybe, I don't know, Mark, do you agree? Maybe one of the most important in the community association history. I think there's so much reform on the table right now. I think it's probably up there as far as I've known. I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I haven't seen anything quite like it.
Agree. In my 20 years, I'm in my 20th year of advocacy now, representing clients, including CEOMC, and it is the most impactful session I will have been a part of since in my career, to give you some idea of what's at stake this year. So for sure.
Well, again, guys, both gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an awesome show. And we'll make sure that everyone has all you guys' contact information, and all that information, again, is going to be available for our viewers to click and read all about it. So again, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, guys, great show. A lot of information unpacked there. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, right? There's so much information for you as a property manager or a community association board member to know. And a lot of this information is not only relevant to board members, right? and to property managers. There's also business owners. There is legislation regarding multifamily properties and other commercial constructors. So, make sure you're paying attention to stuff. Make sure you're tracking the trend. Now, I know this show is really dedicated to obviously what's going on in the community association industry, but there is a lot more at stake here. So if you own and operate commercial buildings, whether it's a hotel or multifamily or a community association or homeowner association, make sure you're tracking these things, because whether they pass a law that directly impacts you today, or at some point, as mentioned in the show, this gets adopted on a national scale, right? A national level, things are going to change. And it's most important for you to understand what's coming so that you can plan for these things. There's a lot of conversations about budgets. How are we going to pay for these things? Yeah, it's great to have inspections all the time. It's great to make sure that there are reserves for repairs and work that needs to be done. But can your unit owners afford it? Do you have reserves now that can go to doing some of these things? Are the banks going to lend on it? Are you going to be able to borrow money to be able to do these repairs? And what are those terms going to look like? I know the banking environment is changing like crazy right now. Certainly with the changes in the economy and rates and everything else, there's a lot of things at stake here, and it's really important that you know this information. But this has been a great show. I am so excited that CEOMC could join us. I'm really looking forward to our upcoming fishing tournament. It's going to be an absolute blast. We're going to have all the managers out there and interested people participating in this thing. We're going to have lots of pictures and videos of it. It's going to be a fun event. But really what it's about is about bringing like-minded people together to talk about important issues, spend some time with us so that when it comes down to helping and supporting your association, we're familiar with each other. We know who's within our network. How can we help and support our communities? Certainly in dealing with a very difficult time. It's exciting, but it's very difficult. There's a lot to process here, a lot to break down. So make sure you stay informed. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, like us and follow us on all the social media platforms. We want to make sure that you have information you can use. Again, thank you so much for joining me right here on the Recovery Report Live, and join us next week, same place, same time.